how do you reframe faith as something that you don't know when you were taught that faith was something about all that you do know?
Shit. That's a hard one.
You can come to therapy with me. It's a great time.
Before we get into the episode, we wanted to give a content warning. In this episode, we will be dealing with mental health struggles, but specifically we do get into suicidal ideations, death by suicide, and a whole host of other depression issues, postpartum depression, and some dark thoughts. So if that is not for you, if you're not in a place where you can hear that, go ahead and skip this episode, ghosties. So we just wanted to give that little warning so that you can protect your peace and do what is best for you. Thanks, ghosties, and here's the episode. Welcome to Holy Ghosting, a podcast about deconstruction with your middle-aged mom friends. I'm Lindsay.
I'm Meg.
And today on the pod, we have Anna Gazmarian. Welcome, Anna.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We're so glad you're here. Anna is the author of Devout, a Memoir of Doubt, and it was published last month, and it's all about your journey, your mental health journey, how that was impacted by being raised evangelical, getting diagnosed with bipolar disorder in college, and sort of your spiritual and mental health journey. We're very excited to talk to you about this. We have gotten into some of our mental health stuff on the podcast, how we were all diagnosed with our various anxiety, depression, ADHD later in life. And in fact, our very first episode ever was called Panic at the Altar and was all about Meg and how you were dealing with some pretty intense anxiety when you were younger, having hallucinations, and you were told to pray it away. And did that work for you, Meg?
You know, it didn't. I actually think it led to more panic attacks and more anxiety and more of that unknowing how to even function in the world, because if God hadn't taken it away yet, like, what was I doing wrong? Did I have to change my prayer language? Like, you know, what was it? Like, Anna, did you experience a similar thing?
Yeah, I can very much relate. I had ADHD, depression, what else? Anxiety, all of the things, the trifecta when I was younger. And I was like obsessed with praying. I kept like a journal and had these like obsessive lists of everything that I thought I was sinning about, because I was like, well, if I repent enough and if I pray enough and if I read my Bible enough, all of this will go away. And then it didn't. So I feel like for me, I do have OCD, which I realized later in life, but there's a thing called like religious OCD where it's like very much grounded in religious practices and upbringing. And so for me, it's, even though I'm not in that world anymore, I still have that framework in my mind that when I do have a mental health crisis, my first reaction is, what am I doing wrong? Like, how am I disappointing God?
Yeah. And I think that it took all of us a really long time to figure out that, like, that praying, I don't, when you put your whole life into praying something away and then it doesn't go away, but then you keep praying, like, that's a wild thing to me, that we just kept believing it and being like, this is going to fix it for all of our childhoods. And it's so damaging because you don't get the real help that you need. Clearly, we're going to get into all of this. I want to like go backwards a little bit. And I want to know, Anna, like, how were you raised? What kind of church were you raised in? Like, how strict was your family? Did they believe in therapy or treating things with medication? I'm just curious, like, the messages you heard, and down to like, were you allowed to read Harry Potter? You know, that's a good indicator of, it's funny because now I have different feelings on Harry Potter for very different. I'm like, I don't know if I want my kid to read Harry Potter, but not because of the witchcraft. It's more the transphobia that I have a problem with.
Yeah, understandable. So I grew up in Winston-Salem, which is like a really small town in North Carolina. My family, it's confusing because there's so much about, so I went to like a Southern Baptist high school. And like, there were so many rules and things that I just didn't talk to my parents about. I just thought this is the way it is. And now in retrospect, I'll mention things to them and they're just like, what, you were taught that? Because I just kind of took the teachers as like, okay, they're these like absolute people and there's no questioning them. So like my dad is like the original hipster and would take me to like, we saw Coldplay in like a high school gym. So I wasn't in a situation where it was like, okay, you can't listen to secular music. At the same time, I went to the Pentecostal church because they had Screamo Christian music. And I tried dating one of the drummers, but he didn't like me because I wouldn't kiss guys until we dated for 3 months because I didn't want to be a temptation to him.
Oh my God, same. I had such a same rule.
What a good girl. I did not have that rule.
Mine was 2 months. I mean, you know, Anna's
I was the
more
slut
pure.
amongst us. Yeah, I was the one who had premarital sex, so I'm the slut amongst us.
That's the standard, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, but a lot of heartbreak because it's like, I have to have this mean something. And I was friends with all these girls that were in hookup culture because I was like, I gotta convert them. I gotta be the light to them. So that was my life. But I'm still friends with them. And I'm like, I don't understand how you're my friend.
And why didn't they convert you? I mean, that's what I would be upset about if my friends were like slutting it up and then just I was over here being a pure little angel. Come on.
I mean, okay, so this is going to be, I don't know if this is controversial, but one thing that I do like about growing up evangelical, probably the only thing that I like about being evangelical is I've just like never really cared about being different and never really felt like I have to go with the pack. So even now that I've left that world, I'm just so used to not fitting in really that, yeah, I don't know.
That is a really good, wow. Yeah, I've never thought about it like that. But, you know, good for us because now we get to be out here. We get to be queer. We get to just like
do our
whatever.
Thing.
Yeah.
We're going against the flow. Remember those Christian posters? Right. It was like, I think it's all like the Darwin fish and then there's the Jesus fish. It's going against the flow.
We're still doing it.
That was you. That was all of us. So
gosh. I love that.
Way to make that a reality.
Yeah.
So were your mental health struggles, like, did you know from a young age that like you felt that, were you actually diagnosed with like OCD and anxiety when you were younger or was that all later?
So when I was my parents were very proactive about my anxiety and my my ADHD. Like they sent me to a specialist very young for ADHD. I got on medication, but the problem was like at my age, like getting kids on mental like medications can be really bad. So the one that I was on, like I lost a ton of weight. I was crying at school every day. But like there just wasn't a lot of information about it. There wasn't a lot of, and again, like I didn't really tell my parents a lot of things about my emotions because I was like, this is how I'm supposed to feel. And then for my anxiety, yeah, I got that from like my primary care doctor, but I was like really into the whole John Piper, Mark Driscoll, all those like really great men, and
those white guys that are only slightly problematic. Yeah.
Yes, right. And so I feel like my parents did whatever they could, but it was like the culture in which I was raised in and the messages I was getting from people in power. It was like I saw my parents down here, and then I saw pastors and teachers and Christian leaders up here. They were just like God, basically. So I remember when I was in high school, for instance, there was this crazy teacher. She was an English teacher, and she just would give these sermons. And I think maybe I'm like, maybe you're not complementarian. Maybe you actually secretly want to be a pastor. But she stood up and she was like, how many of you have heard of suicide and going to hell? And I was like, what? And she's like, if you commit suicide, you're going to go to hell. And there's this guy in my class who I eventually got kicked out for drinking a beer, but that's a side story. He was like, my uncle died by suicide. Does that mean he's going to go to hell? And she's just like, yes. So that happened. Then one of my best friend's dad died by suicide, and it was the same thing. And I remember thinking with her, like, is her dad in hell? Like, is this a thing? So that was my framework for depression. And then with anxiety and ADHD, I was just so convinced that every thought had a meaning and had a spiritual meaning. Mm-hmm. And as someone with OCD now, like that, I got diagnosed with OCD when I was after having my daughter. I think my hormones just got fucked up. But like every thought has a meaning and a value, and I would just ruminate and ruminate and ruminate. Be like, well, what is God trying to tell me in this thought? What is God trying to teach me in this? If I think this, what does this say about my faith? If I'm thinking about myself, I'm not thinking about God, so this doesn't matter. So I just had a lot of shame and guilt around my anxiety because I tend to catastrophize and like future trip and all these things. And for me, it just felt like a spiritual deficiency. And so then I got like super into apologetics and like went to these apologetic conferences. and tried to debate atheists about evolution. Because like, if I have some degree of like truth, maybe that will make these symptoms less.
Mm. If you have certainty about your
Yeah.
faith, maybe your brain will just like fall in order.
So that's what's so freaking hard about anxiety, is because when I was younger and I was in that world, there was a degree of certainty. Like there was a degree of, if I follow these rules, if I do these things, this is what it means to have a faith. And everything just felt certain. And I feel like what's so hard is like faith was used as a coping mechanism for everything, and that's not what it's designed to be. So by the time I left, it was just like I had no idea how to control my emotions or do anything because I had no coping mechanisms.
Your coping mechanism is God, right? That's it. It's just like cast all your cares upon him and he will magically fix it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And turns out it's not actually the case.
And now like I'm in my 30s and I just don't know how to handle uncertainty. And then I just get these like control kicks. And like I'm trying to control some aspect of my life because I'm just so used to having that like somewhat safe place, or even if it was just a complete delusion and not real, like it was an easier way to live. This is harder.
Yeah, I was talking about a similar thing with my therapist, and she was like, "Oh, it's so interesting that you describe church as a safe place. Like, talk about that." And I realized that it was because there were guardrails. There were these rules that I thought were so hard and so exact that if I just followed them, that everything, you know, like you're saying, would just kind of ease away, and that I would get to be one of those, you know, godly women who just like walked through the world with ease and just like had no worries, had no cares, just like he would make everything perfect in front of me. And that actually wasn't a safe place. Like I thought church was a safe place to go to. Turns out like there is no winning, and there's not safety in that. It's actually contributing to the anxiety because you're never good enough, you know? And with, especially with evangelicalism, like evangelicals refusing to even talk about mental health as something that is not just controlled by God. That's the flip side of it for me, that when I realized, you know, these are anxieties I'm feeling, it meant that my faith wasn't strong. It meant that I wasn't trusting enough in God. And it's this cycle of just never being good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a failing on your part, because if you had enough faith and you believed it enough, then it would just go away, or that's what we were told. And I know that we've talked before on the podcast, specifically, I think with neurodivergent folks or people who, you know, OCD or what have you, fall into those camps. I think that high control religion is especially harmful to people with those kinds of neurodivergencies, because it preys on people. Like the religious OCD aspect, I think is so important to talk about, because you adopt all of those things and you're like, great, I have this set of things that you can obsessively follow. And you have this prescription for like, okay, if I am good, then all of these things will be solved. But I think that that's why the after effects, the aftershocks of this are so much more damaging, because it takes people who are that much more bought in, it takes you that much longer to get out. I don't know if you experienced that, if you felt like you were just all in, and now, you know, as you're coming out of it, I imagine the claws are in pretty deep, and that your deconstruction has been, you know, interesting at best.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. Like when I think the hardest symptom for me was like once I started having suicidal thoughts after I did get diagnosed with bipolar when I was in college. Once I started having suicidal thoughts, that was like, I was like, why is Satan trying to convince me to do something that would send me to hell? And why is God allowing that? And so I went through my psychiatrist notes because I requested them when I was writing this book. And one of them was like saying that hell was a protective factor for me, because I would like stay up all night thinking about death and thinking about killing myself, but I couldn't do it. I don't know how to explain it other than this like literal physical reaction of just sweating, and you can't move because you're just these thoughts. It's like the only thing that feels like the thoughts can go away is if you actually go through with it. And so that experience, that was the hardest part for me with my diagnosis. It wasn't the actual symptoms. It was the spiritual layer that was on top of it. And then my deconstruction, the thing that is so hard for me is I think, okay, I've gotten through everything. And then there's another layer. And it's just this constant thing. And I do ketamine treatment. And one time I was high and I was like, what do you do when you believe something that you really don't want to believe, but you can't stop believing it? Like, I wish I didn't believe in a God, honestly, in a lot of ways, because it's just so much. And there's so many layers. And now that I'm allowing myself to feel things, and now that I believe in a God that's safe, I'm just constantly asking questions. I'm constantly in anguish about the world. And it's exhausting. And then the deconstruction thing for me got even more heightened after my daughter, because now there's this element of, if I raise my daughter in faith, and like I do want to teach her about God, how can I do it without the same messages that I grew up, and especially around purity culture. So for me, there's more at stake now. It's not just a matter of me figuring out, I really do not want to create the same damage. And when I was pregnant, I was like obsessively reading about hell, and to the point that I was like, okay, I don't believe in hell anymore. Now what? And so I'll just go through these eras where I'm like, okay, I gotta tackle this issue. And I even did that with my book. I was like, okay, by the end of this book, I'm going to figure it all out. And then I didn't. And then my editor was like, yeah, this is what faith is like, you don't know. And it's like, how do you reframe faith as something that you don't know when you were taught that faith was something about all that you do know?
Shit. That's a hard one.
You can come to therapy with me. It's a great time.
Let's do some group time talks. Jesus Christ.
Okay, so I want to go back to, I'm very curious. We should add a trigger warning ahead of this section. I want to go back to, we haven't talked a lot about suicidal ideations and specifically the messaging about suicide being a sin. That is something I heard and was a big struggle in my family. My mom's best friend, or one of her best friends, like died by suicide, like when I was probably 7. And it was after she was like single. She was always around. She was like a babysitter of ours. Like, we loved her. She was around all the time. But she had some like substance abuse problems, but it was found out that she was in a lesbian relationship. And then after that was found out, she shot herself. God. I remember how, sad, but I just remember like I had been taught already at that young age of 7, like I knew it was a sin. And like, she was my Aunt Debbie, in my mind, like she was like family to us. And I'd be curious now to ask my mom, like, so do you think Debbie's in hell? Because I just remember the grief, and like my mom packed us all up in the car and we just took a long drive, and she was just sobbing because she was so sad about her. But, and there's the blame, like we blamed it on because the gun belonged to the woman she was in the relationship. So all the blame got put on the woman, that she was having this affair with, and she must have corrupted her mind and blah, 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 because how dare she be a lesbian? Like, ugh. The messaging around that, like those are the types of things that I have to unpack, is like realizing that like this very close personal family friend, it's like the layer, who was a person like I adored and looked up to, but then like her legacy was tarnished because of this relationship. And I'm so curious, like when things like that affect, part of me is like, Mom, did that affect your theology? I really hope it did. I really hope that you don't believe that, like, it's one of those things where, and I'm sure like, I feel like there's evangelicals that get around and be like, well, if they just like right before they did, they pray the sinner, whatever it is. Like, I always feel like you had your Hail Mary of like, it's fine, I can just like pray the sinner's prayer real quick, like just to make sure I'm good to skate on in there, if I'm gonna, but as you start having suicidal ideations, do you have this in your mind of like, this is like this horrible sin? Do you have this fear of hell? I'm curious how that affected you as you're having these mental health struggles.
Yeah, I mean, it was honestly the worst situation because I had this really deep fear of hell, and from a very young age, prayed every night not to go to hell, obsessively journaled my sins, even in college, because I was like, if I forget one, I'm going to go to hell. And I talk to people about it now that grew up with them, and they're like, where did you get that framework? And I'm like, I don't know. I think maybe it was about control. I don't know if it was ever really preached to me. My parents didn't say that. I didn't really get the whole idea of forgiven sins. And the other thing is, like, the thing about suicide is that I was taught to me as the unforgivable sin. And so not only would it be like, it was sinning directly against God. And that was the hardest part about my diagnosis, and I couldn't really grapple with that. I remember when Rick Warren's son died by suicide, and everyone just completely canceled. And not canceled, they didn't cancel him, but I mean, I think it's a larger problem in society that when someone dies by suicide, that's all that they're reduced to. I'm a huge Sylvia Plath girl because I'm a like manic pixie dream girl, like the whatever. But I love Sylvia Plath. And it's like her whole legacy is lost because everyone is so focused on the way that she killed herself. And we live in a society that romanticizes suicide. And I feel like that's carried over into evangelicalism and how they view it. And there's no other model than viewing it as a defining factor in who you are. And it's a matter of not having enough strength. And so it's messed up, but for a really long time, that's what kept me alive, was thinking I can't go through with this because I'm going to hell. And because I had such a deep fear. And it was weird because when I was younger, I used to have these really vivid dreams about me falling into hell. And when I was suicidal, I started having those dreams again. And I didn't know, like, I was like, is this telling the future of what's going to happen to me? And so for a while, it was hell as the protective factor. And then even when hell was taken out of it, after having my daughter, it was like, okay, I can't do this because of my daughter, which is a healthier reason than hell. But it's the same thing of, it's like your mind is at war because all your thoughts are telling you to kill yourself. And for me, it's complicated because people always say that it's like, oh, you know, you were in a hopeless situation. And so that's why people killed themselves, like the situation. And for me, it was just the thoughts were so obsessive that it was like, I need to do something to get these thoughts to go away. And so I would just literally sleep all day and then like take trazodone or something and just go to bed at like 5 because it was like, that was my way of staying alive, was just not being conscious.
Which is, it's a lot. I'm sorry that you've had to go through all that. And I really appreciate your honesty about your struggles. I think that like these are things that a lot of people don't talk about. And, you know, specifically the way that we were raised, you know, like it showed a moral failing, you know, if you talked about these kind of things. And so I think there's so much shame associated with even like for someone like that's not something I've struggled with, like suicidal ideations is not something I've had a lot of, but even just something as like mild as anxiety, you know what I mean? Like sometimes like, you know, like that's just a normal, like that's part of the American experience. And I'm like, if you're on Lexapro, like how are you surviving in this world? But even something like that, admitting anxiety, admitting that like, I wasn't, I guess, in control or that I couldn't get it all together and just function perfectly on my own with the power of the Lord. I think that like needing to rely on medicine to help, there was just, I don't know that it was ever overtly said. I mean, at least in my home, like counseling was never an option. Medication, it was just Jesus healed me. And we like, my parents had some traumas that they have still never, you know, worked through because of the Lord. But I am so grateful for therapy. And I mean, from the get-go, I've always been like, I do not want a Christian therapist. Like, don't even get me started. I don't think Christian therapists are real. Like, they're fake news.
I mean, the thing that's so scary about them is that like the whole, I'm guessing, you know, like the whole branch of like Christian counseling where they like don't believe in mental illness and it's just like the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But like, you don't know that. So, like, I've had so many friends that were like, I want to go to a Christian therapist. And I'm like, send me what school they went to and I will tell you if you're allowed to go see them. Because you don't know, and then you get there. I mean, that my first therapist was a Christian therapist, and she did not mention anything about mental illness. Everything was spiritual. She played like this Christian radio station every time I went there. And I think in that environment, it's like you can't really be honest about what you're going through.
Yeah, the condemnation that you're going to feel, this, how everything is turned into a sin, how everything is your fault, how you're just not trusting or faithful enough. Like those are such harmful messages, especially when you're young, especially when you don't understand like what this whole world around you is even about and like the pressures that you're going to feel as you get older. And so, yeah, I wonder too, like what ways did you feel like the church kind of failed you in that place of understanding and really just like, not just even understanding, but just like embracing who you are and doing it in a way that you can live a good and happy life?
I mean, there's a lot of things. So when I was in college, my freshman year, I fell in love with this guy that like posted quotes by Abraham Lincoln saying he was like the most miserable man in the world. And I was like, wow, that's so hot. So I got in a relationship with him because sad boys. I was like, wow, he lets himself be sad. He must be good. Yeah, that's great.
That's really manic pixie dream girl of you.
Yes,
just really leaning into that. Yeah.
Leaning into it. And well, he was waiting for a girl that was a missionary in Uganda to get back. And then like I was in a love triangle, whatever. But it fell apart. And then he told his pastor, like there was like some physical stuff that happened like without my consent, but that part was left out. And the pastor approached me and was like, I really need to counsel this guy and help him through these things. I think you need to get off the leadership council because you're distracting him and it's not good for him and his mental health. So I got asked to leave this community. And so that was like the crux of when my mental health went downhill, because I lost a lot of people, or I felt I was in the situation where I was like, I want them to know my side, but no one really did. And I still had a few friends left, but I lost a lot of my community when I needed them. And that happened. And then my mom has been sick like my whole life, but she got sick again. So like all these things were happening and I didn't feel like I had the support from the church at all. And whenever I did go to them, it was very much just, you know, one day all your tears will be wiped away when you're in heaven. And I remember being like, okay, cool. Then what's the point of me being alive? If one day all this pain is going away, why would I stay alive if this pain is going to stay? I think like a lot of my experience has just been, even in like more progressive churches, of them just not knowing what to do with people that are suffering. Just on the most basic, something that just makes me super ragey is how many pastors give advice that therapists should be giving. I mean, it's always bad advice, but like I went to all these pastors for help with my mental illness, but they had no idea what to do because they had no training. And after my diagnosis, like I went to my high school pastor because I didn't have my college pastor, and he just was like, yeah, my mother-in-law has schizophrenia and she's crazy. And that was his only feedback. And then he gave me a book by Mark Driscoll to read about dating.
Oh boy.
Yes, and I read it.
Just fix yourself.
So to summarize, you got asked to leave your like leadership or your church group due to his mental health, the dude you were dating, his mental health. Yours was not taken into account. You were given some platitudes about how God is going to wipe all your tears away, and then you were given a book about dating by Mark Driscoll. That sounds like the trifecta of bullshit.
Yes.
Yes.
Bad.
100%. That is a story of what not to do when someone comes to you and needs support. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Churches need to be trauma informed. I don't know how we do that, but that would be a great thing moving forward, is just like people need to figure out. And I think that like I do like a lot of work with my church and house folks, and we've been going through some like trauma informed training and just realizing that like, again, as part of my upbringing, like I wasn't really I did not know how to sit with things and how to like meet people in their despair. We just want to fix it, right? We want to give them the food and like have our photo op and then send them on their way without actually like addressing their root causes. And over and over again, that's Christianity just feels it's so like whitewashed in the literal sense of the word, but in also of the like, I don't know if we're calling it like God wash or whatever, just sort of like he'll wipe all your tears away. I think that there's this sense of like cast all your cares upon him, all these platitudes. And don't get me wrong, those verses can feel very hopeful at times in your life. But if you keep trying to cast your cares upon this God that you can't see and a lot of times can't even feel, and then you're still left with the anxiety, the depression, the ideations, all of these things, it feels really shitty. It's like, I've done my best. I've tried to cast them and they are still fucking here. So what does that mean?
I think the problem for me was like, and still kind of is, like when I was in that space, it was like, I freaking hate Easter because everyone skips over the sad shit and just goes to the celebration. And I feel like growing up, that was my Christianity, was rushing to the resurrection and ignoring all that involve that. But then on the other extreme, I'm like, I'll just sit in these spaces of like pain and emo-ness because I'm like, I don't want to embrace the good things. And so one thing like my therapist makes me do is say like things that I'm grateful for, but then also acknowledging what is hard about those things, and also acknowledging, like I'm grateful and things are good, but also these things. So it's like, how can suffering and goodness coexist instead of ignoring one of the other?
Yeah, that's amazing advice. Like, I feel like just allowing ourselves to not have a this or that, an either or, a black and white option, just gives me so much more freedom, right? In just understanding myself and asking myself different questions. So if there isn't just one solution to something, or if I just don't instantly fail because I don't do it, just that freedom in having options and different ways of expressing myself, or of even asking myself different questions than I would have. I would have just given everything over to God and assumed that it would be better. And then when it wasn't better, I don't know, I guess restarting that same silly thing again. But what are some other things, like other ways that you would help other people who grew up evangelical, who were not allowed to have these conversations or even to talk about even understanding what mental health means?
I mean, I think for me, like the most important thing is creating spaces of safety. And so for that reason, like I'm really vulnerable and honest about my mental health situations, and people will just like give out my number when they find out someone goes on medication. But I think like when in conversations with people, something that I talk a lot about is the life of Jesus, and also like looking at passages in scripture that are often overlooked, like Lamentations. And because I think it's easy to be like, okay, I'm going to leave all of this. And I understand that, but I don't think you can ever really leave. But for people that want to stay, it's like you're constantly re-traumatizing yourself, basically. Like I can't go into a church without almost having a panic attack or read my Bible. I don't know the last time I read my Bible because like all the verses, the interpretations are still there. So I think something for me that's been really helpful is like finding God outside of the church in really small and meaningful ways. I think I see that a lot in people, like not just Christians, but just in the love and the care that I've seen from friends and family, and even viewing communities as churches, like my gym, the way they've supported me, like through a separation, through I had to go to a facility after writing this book, and they like made meals for my family and raise money, and like those communities to me where everyone is different, and coming together and showing God's love, like that's to me what church can be. And so I think a lot of Christians, at least for me, when I was diagnosed, is I felt all this pressure to keep going through with all the notions that I had been taught and what it meant to be a Christian, and also someone with mental illness. It was like, it's like, I don't think it has to be as rigid as we make it. And also just like accepting where you're at. Like there were many years where I could not go to church, and I'm back in the season I'm not going to church, but just kind of accepting that, and also recognizing that like a lot of the fear comes from a place of not viewing God as a safe space. And so for me, it took a really long time to recognize that. But I feel like really the only thing that I held on to for a really long time was just viewing the life of Jesus and the suffering that he went into, and thinking about a God that isn't afraid of suffering and isn't afraid to suffer alongside of us. And I mean, this is like, I don't think God is all powerful. And I think not believing in that has like opened up a lot for me, instead of like feeling like I have to justify all these things. It's like, this is just a broken world, and that's just the way that it is.
Yeah. And so do you, at this point in time, consider yourself to be a Christian or a follower of Jesus? Like you're still a person of faith at this point?
Yeah.
And what kind of church it sounds like you're not going at the moment. Have you found like a church that feels safe, or a place that you feel like is home to you, or have you not figured that out yet?
So I did go to this church for a while, and then deconstructed all this stuff about queerness. It was like, maybe I'm bisexual. I don't know. My best friend is gay, and I've always just kind of been like, yeah, it's not a sin, whatever. Well, not always, but like when I was in college, and I started having gay friends that would come to me about like their experiences in church. I'm like, this just doesn't make sense, and I don't like it. So that happened, and then I think being in the church that I was at, I was like, there's all these churches that people go to and they don't know if they're welcome or not, and that really bothers me because people deserve to know if they're safe or not instead of like waiting until something bad happens. So I really pushed the church to come out with a statement. One of the pastors was for it, one of them was against it. It didn't go through, but then recently they just passed it. But it was like I got to the place while writing my book where the pastor was a man, but there was a woman pastor, and that was great. But going to church and just having someone tell me what to believe about God is how I've lived my faith my entire life. Mm-hmm. Is looking to this middleman to tell me what to believe, or reading these theologians to tell me what to believe. So like when I was writing this book, I purposely was like, I cannot read any theology. I have to lean on my own experiences because my whole life and framework from God has been about other people. So for me right now at church, it's like I need to experience God away from that. And I think especially it's hard when men are preaching to me. I also feel like becoming a mom and seeing Christian mom culture and how we teach children has made it even more difficult for me. And yeah, I hope to go back. I like Episcopal vibes. I will never go to another non-denominational church in my life, ever.
Amen. Yeah. Here for that.
Yeah.
Just, no, hard pass, no thing. Yeah, I love how innocuous like non-denominational sounds. I'm like, this is it's garbage. Let me tell you.
Also, no leadership structure, no accountability, no training, no proper, thanks.
No. Oh. It's funny. We visited, like when we were trying to figure out, we left our kind of like big, like progressive mega church in Portland, which I've talked a little bit about here before, which is not progressive at all. We thought it was at the time, but like they have since like doubled down on like their non-affirming stance and what have you. They were like somewhat racially progressive and like, so sure, that was good, I guess. But we left and we visited another, I don't know if they'd call themselves non-denominational, but evangelical, but like queer affirming, much more open, like has a man and woman, like two pastors who like trade off, but they do like evangelical worship, which I'm an evangelical pastor's kid. So like that was all very normal to me. But my husband, I think we went twice and he was like, I can't do it. I can't do evangelical worship anymore. And I was like, that's fair. That's super fair. And like we've been Episcopal ever since. And like it was different for me. But man, let me like talking about like raising your kids and that and all that. I told this to Meg and Sarai recently because we go to church relatively often and I have no idea what like my kid absorbs. I mean, it's to the point where like we've had to explain to her that like other churches don't like, gay people. And she's like, wait, what? Like she's just like, she gets it now because we've had some of these conversations, but in her mind, that's just so like weird. She thinks like that those churches are the outliers, which is like adorable. And also just like you sweet summer child, like you just have no idea how ugly like the Christian world. And she said something recently about like, what was it? We were talking about she's really into MIA right now, like the musical artist. And which is she's always listening to Paper Planes, that song, like
I love
with
this.
like the gunshots and she's like super in it. And which is adorable. And I said something, I was like, because I went through I've seen her live. I went through a big phase. And so I was telling my daughter, I was like, I had told her about how MIA is, she's like an anti-vaxxer now. She's like super like Christian. She's like kind of gone off the deep end. And so Margot was like telling her best friend about it. I overheard her being like, yeah, I really like listening to MIA, but like she's a Christian and she's kind of annoying about it. And I was like, buddy, you do know that like we are also Christian. And she just goes, yeah, but we're not like those Christians.
Winning.
I was talking about, what was it on Easter? They passed out these little like bags for the kids that had like toys and activities and what have you. There was like a bracelet making kit and there was like a little charm that said John 3:16 and she's like making this bracelet and she like hands the charm to me and she goes, who's John? I was like, oh, how different than when I was 9 and could do my sword drills and I was in Awana and I probably had half the fucking book of John memorized when I was 9. Yeah. So I was like, in a weird way, I was like, I'm going to pat myself on the back that you don't know who John is. I think that that's I think that's okay.
Yeah. Do you just have one kid?
Yeah. We both, Meg and I, just have one, and Soraya's got two.
Okay, so that was a big thing for me because I was like, I just want one kid, but everyone is saying
Yeah.
that I should have another kid, and they have all these reasons that you should not have a kid. It's crazy. I love having.
It's not their business. It's not their business at all.
I was worried because I have sisters and I love my sisters, and I was a little bit worried about, but I live close to my sister. So
Yeah.
she has cousins. We also have like 8 million animals. I'm like, my kid's life is very full. I was like, she's also never asked for a sibling.
Yeah.
But in this economy, and I mean that in all fucking seriousness, I don't know how I would afford another child. Like I can barely, I'm like, please, dear God, I hope she doesn't have to have braces because I don't know how I'm going to deal with that.
Yeah.
Sure, she don't have a college fund set up.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, maybe don't go to college. Student loans, they're going to or go to a junior college or something.
Abolish college.
That's how to go with it.
Yeah, we are one and done, ladies. So we support you in that choice.
Thank you.
Yes. Continue with your single child and your single motherhood. It's probably going to be a way easier life for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was like, I mean, I wanted a kid, but I wasn't like, this is going to change my life. I'm going to define myself by this. I think I just want my daughter to see me have a life.
Yeah.
And is your soon-to-be ex, is he still quite evangelical?
No, I mean, he's respectful, and like we are on the same page about how we want to raise our daughter. So that's good. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
With people who are like us, who were raised in high control religion, who have struggled with mental health, like what do you find has been the most helpful for kind of shedding all those layers, right? Of the shame and the guilt, that the stigmas that were around mental health. Like, how do you take care of yourself? How do you protect your peace?
So I think the older I've gotten, the more community has been really helpful for me, and like using it as like a very safe community where I can like talk and not walk away. Like, how are they judging me? What are they saying? Mm. And so there's a thing where like I will have this thought or I'll have this anxiety about God or something. And I'm like, I just need you to tell me that this is not true. I need you to help. Like I am still really working through trusting my own thoughts and feelings and instincts because those were weaponized from such a young age. And so having like a safe place to process those instead of being ashamed of them has been really helpful. My mental health is complicated because when I wrote this book, and in the book, I start doing ketamine treatment and I go like 3 years without having any suicidal ideations. I'm stable. And I get pregnant and I'm kind of just like, everything's great. Bad's gonna happen. But I think what's so hard about mental illness is like the symptoms linger and they reappear. And right when you think you have your footing, it can all go away at any time. And that had always been my biggest fear, is like getting to a place where things were stable and constantly worrying that it was going to be taken away from me. And it was like, I kind of, when I was pregnant, I was like, oh, I'm not going to have bad postpartum depression. I've experienced all the depressions. I'll be fine. Even like childbirth, I was like, yeah, being suicidal is worse than this. And so after having my daughter, it was terrible. Like everything came back. I hadn't been doing ketamine treatment. So like I didn't have I was doing medicine like every week and nothing was happening while I was writing this book. And it was like this recovery narrative, and it felt so hypocritical to be writing it. And it got to the point where I ended up going away for a month, in like Arizona. And I just remember being like, I don't know who I am to write this book if this is where I'm at, and how can I go on tour? How can I talk about this if this is my life now? And I was on Goodreads because that's a really healthy thing to do. And this guy wrote a review and just said, like, this is the first time I've read a book that helped me process my wife's suicide. And I was like, okay, if this is helpful for him, then like it's worth it for me. And I think after having my daughter, I just really dedicated my time to doing my work because I don't want her to grow up seeing me grapple with my past. Like I want her to see me. I mean, you're never fully healed, but I don't want her to see me grappling with that. Like I want her to see me in the present with her, and not putting my past on her and not constantly spiraling over if she's going to make the same mistakes as me, which I'm sure I still will. I think I'm just slowly having to let go of this false sense of control that I can somehow get my life in order and then things will be okay and then it will be stable for the rest of the road. I think something that's been really helpful for me is learning that sorrow and joy can coexist. And I'm in a really dark season right now, but there's also so many moments of joy and hope. And I feel like my framework in the world right now is like, the world is basically evil, but there are these signs of goodness and joy. And I feel like when you've seen immense suffering and darkness, that it makes those moments even more hopeful and bright, and just grappling and grasping onto those moments for when things are dark. I think now that I'm older and not like when I was first diagnosed, I had no frame of reference of what my life could be and what I was capable of. And so now that I feel like I'm older, I'm able to see that and not believe that it's going to be forever when things are really bad. But I think the biggest step for me was just letting people in and letting me show them and be safe, showing them who I am when I am really depressed. Because it's like one thing to tell somebody, yeah, I have depression, I'm suicidal sometimes. It's another thing for them to like sit with you and be there for you. And I think a lot of it is risky and can be trial and error. And I think a lot of it comes down to self-worth and like how you see yourself. I think for me, like the older too is like, I think it's really easy to define yourself by your mental illness and make it your sole identity. And I think even in my book, I did that a little bit because that was, but I did it because that was my framework where it's like, well, when you're told this is a terrible thing and you get diagnosed with it, that like, of course, that's how you're going to define yourself. But now it's just like, I think becoming a mom, it's like, okay, this is like, I'm a lot more multifaceted than that. And there are all these identities. And if you're focusing just on one identity, everything becomes mismatched. So I feel like a lot of my friends that are mentally ill or newly diagnosed, I'm just like, yeah, don't think about this a lot. Like think about it, but like go do something you enjoy. Go like hang out with a friend. But like, I think it's very easy to just like sit in this place and think, okay, I'm a victim of this and there's no coming out of it. And I think having moments where you really embrace who you are outside of this component is really helpful.
I love that.
Amen. I also think that like finding safe people. I heard something recently that was like, if you were raised like in a home environment that was not like supportive and safe, but when you're finding people now and older that feel like home, like you need to question that if your home was like not a safe place to be in. And so I even think that like finding safe spaces and safe communities can be really difficult, especially if you're not like all we knew were church communities, right? Like, how do you find that? And I know that there's beauty in that, like the in chosen family and finding people who are like your ride or die, who are literally going to be there and sit with you in those really dark times. And I feel so like lucky to have found some of those people. So I think that one thing I just want to say is just like, you might also have to redefine like what safe people are. I think it's like it has taken a lot of us a long time to like figure out what a true, like it's the people who are like with you during the ugliness, who aren't trying to fix you, who aren't giving you those platitudes, who sure as shit aren't giving you a Mark Driscoll book. It's not unsafe, very not safe. Yeah, just something I have personally been grappling with.
Yeah. That's a good point.
I want to make sure we hit on like where to get your book, where to find you on the internet, and all that. But also if you just have any like last things, or if there's appearances you're going to be at or anything, this is like your time to like give us the your spiel on what you want people to know about Anna.
Devout, a Memoir of Doubt is available at your local bookstore, Amazon, Target, all of the good places, but mostly Target, because Target's my favorite place in the world.
Love that. Go buy Anna's book at Target. And then are you on the interwebs where people can find you? Are you regularly posting anywhere?
Yes, I'm on Twitter, and I need to remember I think it's Anna Gazmarian. Let's hope that's what it is. There's no other Anna Gazmarians.
Okay. And on Instagram, looks like you're a Gazmarian.
Yes.
Do you dabble in the TikTok ever?
I don't dabble with TikTok, but I have some secret videos, but
I love that.
They're like my toddler, like with an astronaut helmet and Taylor Swift. And yeah.
And so you can do the fun filters. Yeah. I have some, my kid is like obsessed with TikTok. We over at Holy Ghosting, we love us some TikTok. I feel like we've found like half of our interviews through TikTok, just like rad people. There's a lot of good deconstruction conversations happening on TikTok. Lots of good people.
I need to watch them.
Yeah. We're really grateful that you took the time to be with us today and like had a really like good and intense. I feel like we covered like the highs and the lows, which tends to be our way. We are never like, we deal with a lot of things in laughter and silliness, but we're like also dealing with really heavy shit. So like just your honesty and candor about like some of the things that you've been through is, I think we need to normalize that. We need to have more of those kinds of conversations. So thank you for being willing to talk with us today. And everybody go buy Anna's book, and maybe we can even like figure out a way to do like a little like giveaway or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
like
that'd be
give away
fun.
a copy of your book or something. So
all right.
we've got
so
a month to figure it out. Of course. Have a good one, Anna.
Thanks, you too.
I know this won't be the last time we have conversations about mental health here. So if there are specific subjects that you would like us to talk about, or anybody that you think would be a great guest on the show, please let us know. And thank you to all of our patrons and subscribers. We really appreciate your support. If you want to join us, please go to patreon.com/holyghosting, or you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you want to keep up with us in between shows, we are posting on Instagram and TikTok. Come and find us and hang out, and we'll see you next time, Ghosties.